Perfect. 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 All right. Well, we don't really have an audience, but that's completely fine. This is a we're having this recorded, so whatever time you're watching this, everybody, welcome. We're more than happy to host you guys. Um, you're in for a treat, and I know we're recording this on Mother's Day, and a lot of people are at church at this time, and some people are out of town because of recent graduation events. But nonetheless, whenever you're watching, we thank you very kindly for taking the time out of your busy schedule to listen to what we have to say. All right, if you want to do the next slide, Tate. So before we begin our presentation, we really want to thank ASNN. Uh, they are not sponsoring us, but they are certainly been helping us in the background with what we've been doing. And we want to show our gratitudes and our respects to ASNN. You can find out more information about them, and we'll talk about them again later in our presentation at abolishslavery.us. Yep, next slide, please. So who are we? So me and Tate go quite a long ways back. Me and Tate were the founders of our organization, so we are 17th Forward, North Carolina. 17th comes from the fact that we're trying to amend Article 1, Section 17 of our state's constitution. We'll get to that in a little bit and explain the details as to what specifically we're doing with the 17. But my name's Abraham, guys. I'm a nursing student at UNC Chapel Hill, and I'm currently the president and co-founder of 17th Forward, North Carolina. Tate, did you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, of course. Of course. It's a pleasure to be here with my great friend Abraham. I'm Tate Bennett. I am currently the interim vice president, along with our treasurer. I am a recent alumni of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, along with Abraham. And I believe everything else is more or less self-explanatory.
Certainly. And if you want to know more about us, you're more than welcome to send me and Tate an email. Our email and our contact information is down below. We were founded in January of 23, but we previously had a title called No Exceptions North Carolina. However, the name didn't really specify our intent as an organization, and we also had some administrative changes. So we basically just started back from scratch and created a new organization, which the same purpose and the same goal. And we're still expanding and looking for more members. More on that later. So we now get to the point of who we specifically are. So we're a single specific tailored group. That means that we only care about one particular issue and we have specified it to the T. We're not really focused on anything else other than that particular goal. So 17 Forward North Carolina comes from the fact that we are trying to amend Article 1, Section 17 of our state's constitution, which allows slavery and involuntary servitude as criminal punishment. We are a human rights organization, and we want to make sure that no person, regardless of their status, is subjected to any of these perils. And surprisingly, a lot of people still don't know about this exceptions clause, and this is certainly not their fault. This is more of a systematic fault from all branches of our institutions and government. But we're trying to educate people and through outreach organizations and hosting events and making sure that, again, we envision a North Carolina where none of this, neither involuntary servitude itself or any of its derivatives, such as slavery, exist in any form. Next slide, please, Tate. Why should you join us? We don't really get this question a lot, but we really want people to join us, particularly when it comes to a issue of slavery and involuntary servitude. It's kind of uncomfortable to talk about. However, it needs to be addressed. This is something that, again, a lot of people don't know exists in our state constitution. And this is not just us. There are many other states in the United States that have this, and some that don't. And the ones that don't, they refer to the federal 13th Amendment, which has an exceptions clause as well. In North Carolina specifically, about 86.8% of the prisons um, or people incarcerated are labeled as nonviolent by the North Carolina Department of Corrections. We have 53 prisons and 30, and I think 100 jails. And we have the links here as well in case you guys want to see. You can directly go to those reports. The latest report was in 2021. They don't have any reports later that year, so this was a couple years old, but this is the latest statistics we have from the DOC, which is the Department of Corrections. We are not trying at all to abolish the labor system, wages. We're not talking about that. We're not even talking about um, corrections itself, although the people that are going to be most impacted by what we're doing are within the criminal justice system. We are a human rights organization, so this doesn't just apply to those incarcerated or convicted. This even applies to people living civilly, because um, this amendment is going to impact every North Carolinian, regardless of their status. Next slide, please. Again, when you work with us, you're going to be in a lot of leadership positions. You're going to be networking with a lot of people, not just in our state, but even within our neighboring states and even federally with our partners through ASNN, a few others. And again, we are a growing national movement, but we have a slide on that later on. We'll get to that. The most important thing is that don't go into this really for yourself. You're going to be going into this to make a difference for more than 50,000 North Carolinians. That's a huge number. That includes the amount not just incarcerated, but also on parole. And it includes a huge population of North Carolinians that can contribute to our society in a very positive way. So whenever you're taking that, if you're kind of like borderline, saying, okay, well, how can I contribute, even if as a non-member? Your actions when you work with us will go a really long way in our ultimate goal, which is to benefit the people of North Carolina, and not just those, again, 50,000 people within a particular system, but again, for all 10.8 million of us. Because this amendment affects everybody, not just the people that, again, it's most likely going to affect because of the language. All right, next slide, please. So we get this question a lot, and I was also curious about it. How does involuntary servitude, what is the history behind it? How did it come in North Carolina's Constitution? And why haven't a lot of people not known about this? When I was in high school, I always thought that slavery and involuntary servitude were forever illegal because of the 13th Amendment. But our high school teacher didn't exactly tell us the specific amendment or the texts as to what the amendment said. It wasn't until much later, when I was in college, I found out about this exception just by a random Google search. And because of this exceptions clause, it really made me wonder, why are we still having this in our Constitution, both in the state and federal one? And not a lot of people are talking about it. And again, it comes down to the issue that not a lot of people have been educated about it, which for our purpose as a nonprofit organization is to do outreach educational events on involuntary servitude in North Carolina, the history behind it, and why it's still here, and what changes are being made as the days go by. So in North Carolina's constitution, we have several reformed constitutions. The earliest this exceptions clause came in was in 1868. That was 3 years after the Civil War concluded between the northern and southern states. And we were actually one of the many states after the Civil War that adopted exceptions clauses. Some states, such as South Carolina, our neighbor to the south, did not have exceptions clauses or anything about slavery and involuntary servitude. And you notice for the states that don't have this language, they automatically defer to the 13th Amendment in the US Constitution. But for states that do have this exceptions clause, it's basically a copy and paste of word for word of what's been happening. And this actually goes back to the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. That's one of the earlier times we see it. And that stems all the way from Vermont's Constitution. And we'll get to Vermont in a little bit later in the presentation, but they were actually the founder of this exceptions clause to slavery and involuntary servitude. And ever since then, states has just been kind of copying it and pasting it into either their state constitutions as well as the federal constitution. And again, if you want to look at the links, you're more than welcome to. I always want to make sure I'm keeping my sources out there and we're being as accurate as possible. If anybody has any issues with the sources we get, please reach out to us. We want to make sure we're giving the best and most up-to-date educational content. Next slide, please. So in North Carolina, we have a unique definition of involuntary servitude. You may have noticed previously in the last slide that the U.S. Constitution has an exception for both slavery and involuntary servitude as criminal punishment. But in North Carolina, we outright prohibit slavery, but have that exceptions clause for involuntary servitude. Now, we want to make it clear that they're both the same particular substance. They stem from the same derivation. Slavery is a more general term. Involuntary servitude is the economic application of slavery. And there are many other types of slavery out there in terms of synonyms and other derivatives, and we get this a lot as a criticism saying it's not the same thing as slavery, but in reality it is. So in North Carolina General Statutes 10A, involuntary servitude specifies the performance of labor, basically forced labor, whether or not for debt. But the second one strikes me the most. So by using deception, coercion, or intimidation, even violence. Obviously, using violence to advance someone's means is not an answer to everything and should never be the answer to anything to get things done. However, unfortunately, we do see this in our general statutes, and this is how involuntary servitude is defined as. And you can see the unique associations and similarities this has with many definitions of slavery, although we couldn't find any definitions of slavery in the North Carolina General Statutes. And this also surprised me as well when I was looking at the statutes. Human trafficking is also a synonym for involuntary servitude, and it's actually a crime in the general statutes. It's a felony if someone is found guilty of involuntary servitude, even through human trafficking. Again, there's an exceptions for this in our state constitution that allows the Department of Corrections to implement the same thing on people who are incarcerated or even on parole, because you don't have to be necessarily incarcerated to be subjected to involuntary servitude, just convicted of any crime. So even if it's a very insignificant offense. And there's an exceptions for that, meaning that they're able to use deception, coercion, intimidation, and even the parallels of human trafficking to get and this is specifically the Department of Corrections, to basically use this on people they see as inferior. Whenever you are convicted of a crime, you are seen as property of the state, and most, if not all, your rights are basically stripped. And for the rights you do have intact, nobody even knows if they're enforced because there's not a lot of oversight in the justice system from an independent body. So you can see why there's a lot more, much more complicated issues that stem from this exceptions clause. And it creates a bunch of rabbit holes and a bunch of more problems stemming from this exceptions clause. The next slide, please. And this slide here is just to show the punishments for people who fail to comply with involuntary servitude, meaning they don't want to be coerced, they don't want to be forced, they don't want to be treated with violence to do things they don't want to do. And any reasonable person would agree that nobody wants to engage in anything related to involuntary servitude and not face any punishments for that. Unfortunately, again, because of this exception, North Carolina calls it a Class B disciplinary infringement. You can see all the different types of punishments people in corrections can give to people who are incarcerated. That includes disciplinary segregation, also known as solitary confinement, up to 45 days. Now, in most countries outside the United States, it is illegal to hold someone in solitary for even just a few days. We're talking maybe no more than a day or two. And solitary confinement has already been seen as a type of sensory deprivation, which under international law is seen as cruel and unusual methods of accountability. But again, in North Carolina, this is 100% legal because of the laws and the policies that we have in place. Other things can even include a loss of money. In North Carolina, if you are incarcerated, or even if not, the daily wage is 40 cents to a dollar, and you can get up to $10 taken out if you fail to comply with involuntary servitude. Now, if you made $1 a day, and let's say you got $10 out, and if you worked 5 times a week, again, forcefully, you're probably talking about half of your salary a month being taken away. There's many more moral issues in this, but we don't want to specify it coming down to just corrections. This impacts everybody. So next slide, please, Tate. Oh, and this also impacts 50,000 people in our state. It's not like it's impacting one or two or three people where the issue can be dealt with locally. This is a statewide issue and is occurring in all of our 53 prisons and 100 jails across the state. What have we as an organization done about it? So I was very passionate about this and getting at least something done. And obviously this was before Tate joined the organization. This is when we were previously known as No Exceptions North Carolina. Our House representative, his name is Alan Bouansey. He was running for election in my district. And one of the things I said to him in an interview was, would he, at the very least, introduce a bill to basically strike out that exceptions clause and to prohibit both slavery and involuntary servitude. And one of the promises he kept to me was he would certainly do that. And he was true to his promise. In April of 2023, North Carolina House Bill 822 was introduced in the legislature. It's still sitting there, and it's a constitutional amendment. You can look it up online, and the text you see up right now was the previous text, basically the original filed version of the bill he showed us in a meeting. So you can see it's pretty clean, it's direct, there is no added unnecessary language to it, there's no confusing language to it, it's pretty much clear cut. Slavery and involuntary servitude is prohibited throughout the state for everybody, irrespective of your status. However, very shortly after, we're talking maybe just a month later, extra language was added. And this is primarily to convince other legislators in the state to support the bill. They had concerns for, and which was very surprising. They had a bunch of concerns for if abolishing slavery and involuntary servitude would have unintended consequences. So what ended up happening to the bill is additional language was added. As you can see in the second sentence, highlighted in red and bold, nothing in that section shall prohibit inmates from working when they've been duly convicted of a crime. Now, this actually is in Tennessee state constitution. And at face value, it may not seem quite of an issue. However, if it ever were to go to the courts, they could interpret it as both ways. This can protect voluntary servitude through prison programs, which we're certainly not against, or it can say, which is what we didn't want, another interpretation can be, this is basically null and void. This is rewriting the same thing that was already there. It just ended up wasting everybody's time and effort and money too, because it costs a lot of money to get bills passed. And we obviously looked at that concern and we reached out to Bouansey about it. Fortunately, he also saw the issue. So as of right now, if you go to NC House Bill 822, you will see on the website that exact text. Now, not everything's going to be highlighted in red. That's just the things I want to point out to you. but basically it's the same kind of text word for word. But because of that, in the next session, he's going to reintroduce the bill in the previous slide I showed you, where the clear-cut language, just slavery and involuntary servitude are forever prohibited with a period at the end, nothing else. So we will keep you guys updated as to how that's going. Next slide, please. We got a lot of pushback and a lot of criticisms, both directly and indirectly. What is this bill going to do? And this is very important to talk about because a lot of people are afraid of, quote, unintended consequences, unquote, based on the bill that we're proposing. Our message is very simple. We just don't want this in our Constitution. Everything else will be dealt with by the legislator when it comes to how the reforms are going to be made in the corrections system. Now, we're not really focused on that as an organization. If we did, we would have multiple issues, and then that would really narrow our audience. So our goal is basically to just get this out of our Constitution. This doesn't need to be there. It should never have been there. And then whatever happens afterwards will be out of our control, meaning others will be able to kind of step up to the plate and make those necessary reforms. The way I like to think about this is a lot of the things you see, not just in corrections, but in accountability, in determining rights, and people who even who don't have a voice for themselves, all this really stems down to that exceptions clause. Now, a lot of people, what they do, and you're not just going to see it from our state, many other states are talking about bypassing it. How about we just introduce a law, or let's focus on the branches instead of the root cause? Now, if you focus on the branches, or even if you put laws that are against the Constitution, the courts would obviously strike that out, saying that's unconstitutional. So the only way to really get rid of the only way to advance a lot of those necessary reforms is to have a Constitution that supports it. Because now what we have done is we have created a new foundation in which things can slowly but surely build from. And again, it's to promote unity, education, and support. What we're doing is not just going to impact 50,000 North Carolinians. This is going to impact 11 million, basically the entire population across the state. And we want everybody to have a say in this. And we want to hear criticisms. We want to hear the arguments. And we want to reassure them that whatever it is they're worried about. Hello, sorry, that the mic got cut off. Whatever it is that we're worried about, that they're worried about, is not our goal. We're not trying to make their lives worse for them. We're not trying to increase their worries. So, next slide, please. Okay, yeah, we can speed it up a bit. Again, this is just kind of saying what we have already said, so I'm not going to spend too much on this slide because we already just talked about it. I was talking about several states earlier, such as Tennessee and Vermont. Now, recently, this past couple of years, we had a lot of states that successfully amended their state constitutions to remove any exceptions clause in their languages. And this year, we have 2 states doing it. This is within the span of like 6 years. So it's really good that we're seeing this, and not just from one particular party or one particular side. You're seeing a lot of bipartisan support on it. And as you can see, it's growing way even more, including us. Our goal is to get enough states on it so that we can eventually tackle this at the federal level with the federal amendment seen in the 13th Amendment's exceptions clause. All right. Again, we just talked about that with the federal amendment. We're focusing at a state level, specifically for North Carolinians, but there are others who are working to tackle it at the federal level. And again, we can't do this alone. We need your guys' support. And it's going to require education, outreach, and hosting events like this um, for people continuously and consistently in order for the message to spread and for our mission to be taken as a priority instead of just being brushed away as a side issue. If there's any questions or comments, and I know we don't have people in person, and I think we only have one person in our live meeting. But if you're reading this at a distant point, if you have any questions or comments, please send us an email. Did you want to scroll down after? Yeah, next slide. So that's our contact information. Feel free to send us an email or feel free to reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to help you, and we'd be more than happy to get you to the right place. And please be on the lookout. We're going to have more events. If you subscribe to our email, you'll get notifications and messages from us of when we plan on hosting more events like this, either in person or virtually. So I appreciate you for taking the time to listen to what we had to say today. And as always, please take care and stay safe. We will keep in touch, hopefully soon. All right. Max, did you have any questions?
No, that was good work. I would like to have that presentation that you have there
Yep,
for records in the future. If you could send a copy to me.
we will. It's just we have 4 minutes until the meeting ends because we didn't know that we had only 30 minutes to record, but we will send that out to you,
Thank you.
certainly. And I don't want to keep you standing, Max. I know it's Mother's Day. I want you to spend some time with your family. So we appreciate you coming. Me and Tate will send out an announcement to everybody through email about this recording, and we'll post it on our platform. So thank you again
Okay.
for coming, Max. We
All right,
appreciate
bro.
it.
Bye.
Take care.